What if I told you that the most terrifying army in human history begged for mercy from a carpenter's son? Not the Roman legions that conquered half the world, not the Persian hordes that swept across empires, but a force so dark, so twisted, that even speaking their name sent chills through ancient communities. They called themselves Legion, for they were many. But on one blood-soaked shore beside the Sea of Galilee, something happened that changed everything. These demons, thousands of them, fell to their knees before Jesus. And what they asked for next will shock you to your core. Why would an army of darkness beg to be sent into a herd of pigs? What were they really afraid of? And what does this reveal about a spiritual war most people never see coming? The answer isn't what you think, and it's about to turn everything you know about good versus evil upside down. The night was dying as their boat scraped against the eastern shore. Jesus stepped onto the beach, his sandals crunching on stones still wet from the storm they'd just survived. Behind him, the disciples stumbled from their fishing vessel, hands trembling not from cold, but from what they'd witnessed. Minutes earlier, their master had commanded wind and waves to be still. And they obeyed. Peter's weathered fisherman hands still shook as he secured the boat. "What kind of man is this?" he whispered to James, echoing the question that haunted them all. But Jesus wasn't looking back at the calmed sea. His eyes were fixed on something ahead, something waiting in the shadows of the limestone cliffs. They had crossed more than water tonight. They had crossed into enemy territory. This wasn't Jewish soil. This was the Decapolis, 10 Greco-Roman cities that pulsed with foreign gods and foreign ways. Here, Latin mixed with Greek in the marketplaces. Roman coins bore the faces of emperors who claimed divinity. And in the hills above them, thousands of pigs rooted and grunted. Pigs, the very animals that made Jewish stomachs turn. Creatures so unclean that touching their carcass meant 7 days of ritual purification. But Jesus had come here intentionally, across a storm that nearly killed them all. Why would the Jewish Messiah deliberately sail into pagan territory? What was so important that it couldn't wait for calmer seas or safer harbors? The answer was stumbling toward them through the pre-dawn darkness. And when the disciples saw what approached, they understood why even demons fear the light. From the cliff-faced tombs came a sound that froze human blood. A howl, raw, primal, the voice of someone who had forgotten what it meant to be human. The figure that emerged made grown men step backward. He was massive. Supernatural strength had twisted his frame into something terrifying. Scars crisscrossed his naked body like a roadmap of self-inflicted agony. His hair hung in matted, blood-caked tangles. His eyes burned with a fire that wasn't his own. The townspeople had tried everything. Iron chains, armed guards, exile beyond the city walls. Nothing worked. He shattered metal like pottery. He threw full-grown men aside like children. So they did what humans do with what they can't understand. They abandoned him to the tombs. The dead became his only neighbors. Every night, his screams echoed through the burial caves. Every day, he emerged to cut himself with sharp stones, painting the limestone red with his own blood. Children had nightmares about the wild man who lived where corpses lay. Merchants rerouted their caravans to avoid his territory. He had become the ghost story that mothers used to frighten disobedient kids. But this morning was different. As Jesus stepped onto the shore, the man's head snapped up like a predator sensing prey. Only he wasn't the hunter. For the first time in years, something had come to this desolate place that he feared more than his own torment. He ran toward the beach, not to attack, to surrender. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to carry hell inside your own skin? This man knew, and he was about to meet the only power in the universe that hell itself couldn't silence. The possessed man hit the sand running, but 50 yards from Jesus, his legs gave out. He crashed to his knees, his head whipped back, and when he opened his mouth, the voice that emerged wasn't human. It was a chorus, a cacophony of rage and terror speaking through one throat. "What do you want with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The disciples recoiled. How did this creature know Jesus' name? More shocking, how did it know his true identity? Even they were still figuring out who their master really was. But the demonic chorus wasn't finished. The voice cracked with desperation. "I beg you, don't torture us before the appointed time." Jesus stood unmoved. While his followers trembled, he stepped closer to the writhing figure. His voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. "What is your name?" The response came like thunder. "My name is Legion, for we are many." Legion. To Roman ears, that word meant one thing: a military unit of 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers, the backbone of an empire, the force that conquered nations and crucified rebels. But this wasn't military boasting. This was confession. Thousands of demons had taken residence in one human soul. A spiritual army had occupied this man's mind, body, and will. He had become their fortress, their staging ground for operations in the physical world. And now their fortress was crumbling, because the one person they couldn't defeat had just walked onto their battlefield. What terrified them wasn't Jesus' miracles. It wasn't his teaching or his followers. It was something deeper. Something that made the rulers of darkness beg like frightened children. They knew exactly who he was, and they knew exactly what he was going to do to them. Here's where the story takes a turn that has puzzled scholars for 2,000 years. These demons, this legion of thousands, didn't just surrender, they tried to negotiate. "If you drive us out," they pleaded through the man's bloodied lips, "send us into the pigs." Pigs? Of all the places they could have asked for, why pigs? The hillside above them crawled with about 2,000 swine, a fortune in livestock for the Gentile community. These weren't just any animals, they were symbols of everything that separated Jewish and pagan culture. To the Jews, pigs were abomination, unclean, forbidden, the kind of creature that made you ritually impure just by touching its carcass. To the Romans, pigs were prosperity, food, sacrificial offerings to their gods. In fact, the 10th Legion, the very Roman unit that would later destroy Jerusalem, wore the wild boar as their symbol, a deliberate insult to Jewish sensibilities. So, when Legion, this army of demons, begged to be sent into a herd of pigs, they weren't just asking for a new home, they were making a statement. Think about it. Why didn't they ask to be sent into the sea immediately? Why not flee to some distant mountain? Why specifically request the one animal that Jews considered an abomination? Because they had a plan, and Jesus let them execute it. "Go," he said. One word, simple, final. But what happened next revealed why sometimes the most devastating defeats look like temporary victories. The possession happened instantly. 2,000 pigs suddenly stopped rooting and snorting. Their heads lifted in unison, eyes rolling white. Then they moved. Not scattered wandering, not gradual migration. Mass exodus. The entire herd thundered toward the cliff edge as if pulled by invisible chains. Their squeals pierced the morning air, a sound like 2,000 souls in torment. The earth trembled under their hooves as they stampeded toward destruction. The swineherd scrambled for safety, shouting warnings that came too late. Nothing could stop the tide of flesh and fury rushing toward the precipice. And then, silence. 2,000 pigs launched themselves off the cliff into the Sea of Galilee below. The splash echoed off the limestone walls like a thunderclap. Waves spread across the water in perfect circles, carrying the bodies of an entire herd to their watery grave. In seconds, a fortune had vanished, an entire economic enterprise destroyed. But something else had happened, something the demons hadn't counted on. Their new hosts had committed mass suicide. Why? What drove these animals to self-destruction the moment demons entered them? And what does this reveal about the true nature of evil itself? The answer changes everything you think you know about spiritual warfare. While waves still lapped at pig carcasses below, something extraordinary was happening on the beach. The wild man was sitting. Not pacing, not howling, not cutting himself with stones, sitting quietly beside Jesus like a student listening to a beloved teacher. Someone had found clothes for him, perhaps from the disciples' supplies. His hair had been pulled back from his face. The fire in his eyes had been replaced by something the townspeople hadn't seen in years. Peace. When the swineherds reached town with news of the disaster, crowds poured out to see what had happened. They expected chaos, destruction, maybe the wild man's final rampage. Instead, they found him clothed, calm, and completely sane. The contrast was staggering. This man who had terrorized their region for years, who couldn't be restrained by chains or tamed by force, was now discussing something quietly with the Jewish teacher who had destroyed their livelihood. And that's when fear crept into their hearts. Not fear of the demon-possessed man, fear of the power that had set him free. Because if Jesus could do this, what else might he do? What other changes might he bring to their comfortable, profitable way of life? They had lived with the wild man's presence for years. He was dangerous, yes, but predictable, containable. They knew how to work around him. But this Jesus, this power that could drive out thousands of demons with a word, that could destroy 2,000 pigs in minutes, that was completely beyond their control. The townspeople gathered around Jesus, their faces a mixture of awe and anxiety. They had witnessed the impossible. A man who had been beyond help was now sitting peacefully, thanking his healer. The demonic army that had made their hills ring with screams was gone. This should have been a celebration. The community's monster had been tamed. Their nightmare was over. So why were they afraid? Because the same power that freed their tormentor had just cost them a fortune. And if Jesus stayed, what would happen next? Would he declare their Roman coins unclean, their Greek lifestyle sinful, their profitable businesses incompatible with his God's will? The wild man had only threatened their safety. But Jesus threatened something deeper, their entire way of life. So they made a choice that would echo through history. Please, they said, leave our region. They were asking God incarnate to go away, begging the Prince of Peace to take his peace somewhere else, requesting that the healer who had just performed the greatest miracle of deliverance they'd ever seen, please leave them alone. Because they preferred their pigs to their Savior, their prophet to their redemption, their familiar brokenness to unknown transformation. Have you ever chosen what was comfortable over what was transformational? What was profitable over what was spiritual? The people of Gadara made that choice in the starkest terms possible. And Jesus honored their decision. He turned toward his boat. But the story wasn't over, because the man he had set free had a very different response. As Jesus prepared to leave, the freed man grabbed his robe. Please, he begged, let me come with you. Who could blame him? This teacher had given him back his life, his sanity, his humanity. Where else would he want to be except close to the source of such power and compassion? But Jesus had other plans. Go home to your family, he said gently. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Home. The man probably hadn't thought about home in years. Family who had likely given up on him long ago. A community that had exiled him to live among the dead. But that's exactly where Jesus was sending him. Not to theological seminary, not to formal ministry training. Home, to the people who knew him best in his brokenness. And the man obeyed. He went throughout the Decapolis, all 10 cities, proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. He told his story in marketplaces where Roman merchants hawked their wares, in amphitheaters where Greek dramas played out human folly, in temples where pagan gods received their sacrifices. Everywhere he went, people marveled, not just at his story, but at his transformation. Here was a man they had written off as hopeless, a monster they had abandoned to madness. And now he stood before them whole, articulate, passionate about the Jewish teacher who had set him free. He became the first missionary to the Gentiles, before Paul's journeys, before the Jerusalem Council decided whether non-Jews could become Christians, before the gospel officially crossed cultural boundaries. This unnamed man, rescued from a legion of demons, carried the light of Christ into pagan territory and lit fires that would never be extinguished. But there's another layer to this story that will make your spine tingle. Remember what the demons called themselves? Legion. In first century Palestine, that word carried more than military meaning. It carried the weight of occupation, of oppression, of foreign domination that crushed spirits and dreams under iron boots. The Roman legions weren't just armies. They were symbols of imperial power that claimed divine authority. Soldiers who demanded worship of Caesar as a god. Forces that crucified anyone who challenged Roman supremacy. And one of those legions, the 10th Fretensis, bore the wild boar as their emblem. Pigs, the very animals that Jesus allowed the demons to possess. Coincidence or divine irony? Think about what really happened on that beach. A spiritual army calling itself by the name of Rome's military might was cast out by a Jewish carpenter. The demons fled into animals that symbolized both ritual uncleanness and Roman oppression. And then they destroyed themselves. The message was clear to anyone with eyes to see. Every legion that sets itself against the kingdom of God will ultimately face the same fate. Self-destruction, defeat, judgment. Rome thought it ruled the world. But a homeless rabbi from Nazareth had just demonstrated that true power belongs to another kingdom entirely. Within 40 years, that same 10th Legion would be laying siege to Jerusalem. But their victory would be Pyrrhic. The temple they destroyed would never be rebuilt, and the faith they tried to crush would spread throughout their empire and beyond. The legion of demons prefigured the fate of every human legion that opposes God's purposes. No matter how mighty they seem, no matter how many they number, they will rush headlong toward their own destruction. Here's a question that haunts this story. Was it worth it? 2,000 pigs. In today's economy, that's roughly $600 worth of livestock. Gone in minutes. An entire industry destroyed for one man's freedom. The townspeople certainly didn't think so. They calculated the cost and decided it was too high. Better to live with a demon-possessed wild man than lose that much money. But Jesus saw different math entirely. One human soul equals priceless, irreplaceable, worth any sacrifice. The demons understood this too. That's why they asked for the pigs. They knew Jesus valued human life above all material possessions. They gambled that he wouldn't risk economic disaster for a single person. They were wrong. Jesus didn't hesitate. The man's freedom was worth more than all the pigs in Palestine, more than the townspeople's comfort, more than his own reputation in the region. This wasn't just about demons and livestock. It was about priorities, about what we value most, about whether we measure worth in dollars or souls. The people of Gadara made their choice clear. Money mattered more than miracles. Profit trumped salvation. And Jesus, he honored their decision and left, because he never forces his presence where it's not wanted. But he left behind a witness, a man whose very existence testified that some things are worth any price. There's one detail in the story that most people miss, something the demons said that reveals why they were truly terrified. Don't torture us before the appointed time. What appointed time? The demons knew something that the disciples were just beginning to understand. Jesus hadn't come just to heal the sick or teach about love. He had come to inaugurate a new age, to begin the final countdown to Judgment Day. Every miracle Jesus performed was a preview of coming attractions. Every demon he cast out was a foretaste of their ultimate defeat. Every person he healed pointed toward the day when all sickness, all evil, all death would be destroyed forever. The demons could see it coming. A day when their rebellion would end, when their power would be broken, when they would face the justice they had spent millennia trying to avoid. That's why they begged. Not because they hoped for mercy, but because they wanted to delay the inevitable as long as possible. But here's the twist that would have made them weep if demons could cry. Jesus hadn't come to bring judgment. Not yet. He had come to bring salvation, to pay the price for human sin so that judgment could be averted, to offer mercy to anyone who would accept it. Even the people of Gadara, even the pig farmers who lost their livelihood, even the demons themselves if they had chosen differently. The appointed time was still coming, but mercy had arrived first. As Jesus sailed away from Gadara, he left behind more than one grateful man. He left behind a revolution, not the kind fought with swords and spears, not the kind that topples governments or redraws maps, the kind that changes hearts, that transforms communities, that spreads from person to person like wildfire through dry grass. The man he freed didn't just tell his story once and forget about it. He made it his mission, his calling, his reason for living. Imagine the conversations, the arguments, the late-night discussions in homes throughout the Decapolis. You know Marcus, the one who used to live in the tombs, the wild man who broke those chains? He's back, and he's different. Different how? Sane, peaceful. He says a Jewish teacher named Jesus cast out an army of demons from him, made them go into Petronius's pig herd, and they all drowned themselves. That's impossible. I saw him yesterday. He was laughing with his children. When's the last time you saw Marcus laugh? Word spread. Questions multiplied. Assumptions crumbled. Who was this Jesus? What kind of power could restore a man everyone had given up on? And if he could do that, what else was possible? The seeds of doubt about pagan gods were planted. The possibility of a different kind of deity, one who cared about broken people instead of just demanding sacrifices, began to take root. By the time Jesus returned to the region years later, the ground had been prepared. Not by trained theologians or professional missionaries, but by one man whose life had been utterly transformed. Look around you. Right now, this minute. Do you see them? The people society has written off, the ones living in their own version of the tombs, isolated, tormented, seemingly beyond help, the addict shooting up in the alley, the homeless veteran talking to voices only he can hear, the teenager cutting herself in bathroom stalls, the executive drinking himself to death in his penthouse suite. They're still out there, still crying out in their own graveyards, still cutting themselves with their own versions of sharp stones. And the rest of us? We're like the people of Gadara. We see them. We might even feel sorry for them, but mostly we avoid them. We cross the street. We change the channel. We convince ourselves that some people are just too far gone, too expensive to save, too disruptive to help, too costly to care about. But Jesus still walks across storms to reach them, still steps into places decent people avoid, still speaks peace into chaos and light into darkness. The question isn't whether he can transform the seemingly hopeless. Gadara proved that beyond doubt. The question is whether we want him to, whether we're willing to pay the price, whether we value souls more than our comfort zones. Because saving people is never convenient, it's always expensive, and it will always disrupt our carefully ordered lives. Just ask the pig farmers. Here's the shocking truth that Legion tried to hide by begging for pigs. They were already defeated. Not just eventually, not just theoretically, actually completely, irreversibly defeated. Think about it. If thousands of demons had any real power against Jesus, would they have begged? Would they have negotiated? Would they have accepted exile into a herd of suicidal swine? Or would they have fought? The fact that they fell to their knees and pleaded for mercy reveals the cosmic truth that terrifies the forces of darkness. They have no authority when true authority shows up. Every temptation you face, every fear that grips you, every addiction that enslaves you, every depression that suffocates you, they're all drawing their power from the same source, the lie that they can't be defeated. But Gadara exposed that lie. When light walked onto the beach, darkness didn't even try to fight. It surrendered immediately and begged for the smallest possible mercy. The demon's greatest weapon isn't their strength. It's their ability to convince us they're stronger than they are, to make us believe we're helpless against them, to persuade us that our tombs are permanent addresses. But a man named Legion learned something different on a beach 2,000 years ago. No matter how many demons possess you, no matter how long they've lived there, no matter how comfortable they've made themselves, one word from Jesus and they're gone. The waves still carried pig carcasses when Jesus climbed back into his boat. He had come across a storm-tossed sea to rescue one man, one hopeless, violent, demon-possessed man living among the dead. And when the community rejected him, he simply left. No arguments, no threats, no divine tantrums. He honored their choice and sailed away. But he didn't leave empty-handed. He took with him the knowledge that seeds had been planted, that a witness had been established, that a revolution had begun in the most unlikely place, a graveyard in pagan territory. As the boat pulled away from shore, the disciples were probably processing what they'd seen. Their master had just demonstrated power that made their storm-calming experience look like a warm-up act. But Jesus was already looking ahead to the next person who needed freedom, the next community that might welcome him, the next opportunity to prove that no one is beyond hope. The man they left behind stood on the beach, watching his Savior disappear across the water. But he wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't silent. He had a story to tell, a life to rebuild, a mission to fulfill. He had been legion, many demons in one broken man. Now he was one human soul set free to set others free. The revolution had begun, and demons everywhere were learning to be afraid of what happened when hopeless people discovered they weren't hopeless after all. Your move. What tombs are you living in? What chains are holding you back? What demons have convinced you they're permanent residents in your life? Because if a man possessed by thousands of evil spirits could find freedom on a beach in Gadara, what's possible for you?